Good. Then I think it's time to move on and to give the floor to Maria, who is sitting on the right-hand side on my screen. Yes, that's Maria. And when we were thinking of the first speaker for the sessions, I think it was, let's say, each of us thought, well, maybe that person or that person. And it was Werner, who is also joining in now from Germany, who is a member of IALE-Europe, who said, well, Maria, she received an award from IALE Germany for the best PhD dissertation last year in 2019, so it's already 2 years ago. And then, well, Maria is always ringing a bell because she has been a PhD student in one of the courses of IALE-Europe in 2015. So I thought, well, that's an excellent idea because it also shows, let's say, a nice trajectory from the PhD course in 2015 to where you are now, 21, having a postdoc position in Switzerland. So I thought it was an excellent idea to invite you here. And I'm very happy that although it was on a very short notice that we were able to fix this, that you are willing to present your work for IALE-Europe. So thank you very much already for this one. And I'm very curious what you will tell us. So I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So please, you can start, Maria. You probably have to switch on also your microphone then.
Okay, can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vela, for the introduction and also for thinking of me for starting this series of webinars. I have to say that for me, IALE-Europe has been very important to kind of not being so overwhelmed with opening to the international world that is outside there, because it's quite a big community, but it's very familiar, and it's very nice also to see some familiar faces now. And I almost wish we could just have a chat instead of me presenting something. But yeah, many things. Before I start, I just want to say that I think I am the typical young researcher in landscape sustainability sciences. So human geographer as a background, but then doing my PhD in the Faculty of Environment and then the postdoc in the Faculty of Agriculture. Now I'm in the Land Change Sciences Institute at the WSL. So when I try to think of what is my expertise and what can I present today, I realize that I know a bit of many things, but the expertise is quite difficult to grasp. So I had to think, what do I want to present? How do I want to present myself today? And as I was having a lot of troubles to decide, I just thought, okay, let's go to the main question that has motivated me throughout my research, which is how can the interaction between people and landscapes be enhanced or transformed to foster landscape stewardship? Which is great because it's so overreaching that it can cover everything. But somehow when I ask myself this question, always the words that come to my mind almost instinctively is, well, we have to connect with the landscapes, we have to connect with the environment, with the people, and also with ourselves. So I decided that I was gonna try to present some aspects of my research that have some relation to this connection with landscapes. And for that, I will present some insights of my PhD research that was part of this Hercules project from the 2014 to 17, where I will be focusing mostly on the concept of landscape values and stewardship. And then in the second part, I will be looking at how food can help connect people with landscapes, presenting some insights from a project I am part of in the University of Kassel and Göttingen that is called Landscape Chains. Maybe in some years, I would also add to this some insights from the new project I'm part of at the WSL that is coordinated by Silvia Tobias, on the restorative potential of green spaces in noise-polluted environments. As I think that this idea of nature and green spaces for helping reduce stress levels and for tranquility are definitely a very important aspect in this connecting with the landscape and with people, with ourselves. So I part from the idea that we are witnessing a disruption of the multiple ways in which people connect to their local landscapes, that is derived from the increasing urbanization of the environments we live in, or by the increasing distance between production and consumption landscapes in terms of food, energy, clothing, but also information, acquaintances. Also, this is driven by this simplification and homogenization of landscapes that erodes their character and what makes them meaningful, and the memories that people that live in them have. So this disruption of these connections with the multiple functions of landscapes is one of the key causes of these environmental and social challenges that we are facing. So when I talk about connectedness, I refer to this active involvement of a person with another person, a group of environment. And in the literature, we can see how it is claimed to be important for human well-being, promoting comfort, identity, anxiety reduction. But also there is a big body of literature that highlights the importance of this connectedness for sustainable behaviors, claiming that this more emotional aspect might be more efficient than any other incentive or regulation. So reconnecting people to nature is considered a lever for transformational change towards sustainability. So the first insights I want to present on my research was this connection of to landscape values and landscape stewardship. And for that, I want to explain what I understand with landscape stewardship, which is the responsibility in land managers and resource users to manage and protect the land and its natural and cultural heritage. So landscape stewardship is not that much a management practice, but it's more this ethic that implies moral responsibility that is motivated by this connectedness to play. It has also been defined as the actions of people for the multiple landscape values that they perceive as crucial for their own well-being. So keeping in mind these different definitions, I focus my research in looking at 3 or 4 aspects that I consider key dimensions in landscape stewardship in relation to connectedness with the landscapes. On the one hand, this, how people appreciate the functions that landscape provide, that I will call from now on these landscape values. That can be appreciation of outdoor recreation opportunities, social fulfillment, of a landscape for the products that are grown there, for the harvesting possibilities, but also for aspects such as feelings and inspiration or its existence, nature and biodiversity. Another key concept in the connectedness literature is place attachment. In this image, in this drawing of a man hugging a tree, I want to highlight the more emotional component of the concept, which is connected to this identity and the emotional bonds to the place. And then, of course, the concept of personal responsibility. So ascribing personal responsibility to your actions in order to preserve the values that you appreciate in the landscape, which in the literature is very often connected to the awareness of the consequences that your actions have. So bearing all these components in mind, with my research, I try to address the questions of what are the functions that people value in landscapes, all this with a focus in Europe. How does this connect to place attachment, awareness, and responsibility? And how is this related to some socio-demographic variables? For that, this has been, what I will present has been partly published in this paper, Dimensions of Landscape Stewardship Across Europe. And the research process consisted on a cross-site comparison study of six municipalities, all rural or peri-urban agricultural landscapes, where we carried out a public participation GIS survey with local residents and asked them to locate on a map the places they value for the different functions that they provide for their well-being. And we also give them a list of statements they had to agree or disagree with in order to elicit their levels of attachment, responsibility, and awareness. So, well, these are the 6 landscapes that were included, all very diverse, but yeah, rural, peri-urban landscapes, agricultural landscapes. So what we can see in this plot, where I show the percentage of respondents that have mentioned each of the landscape functions, is that most of the respondents appreciate outdoor recreation opportunities, the beauty, social fulfillment. But what is not surprising, but catches attention, is that even when we are talking about agricultural landscapes, only a bit more than half of the respondents mention functions connected to local production and harvesting possibilities. So this, on the one hand, shows the potential of outdoor recreation for creating new ways of connecting with the landscapes. And the other hand, the marginalization of these more maybe traditional ways of connectedness with the agricultural landscapes. When looking at how the perception of these landscape values were connected to the levels of responsibility, attachment, and awareness in the respondents, we saw how respondents that showed a high level of responsibility appreciated a wide variety range of landscape functions. So this makes us think how important it is to provide varied ways of interacting with landscapes in order to foster this stewardship. Also interesting here is the role of more intangible aspects such as existence, feelings, inspiration, as those were the ones that showed a more significant relation to the levels of responsibility, and were also connected to place attachment and awareness. We also found how important it was the role of accessibility, proximity, and cultural heritage in appreciating a diverse function, a variety of functions. So urban centers concentrated many of these landscape functions that were valued, cultural heritage also, and public paths. Also interesting was to observe how respondents that have been living longer in the area, had antecedents from the area, and claim to have a better knowledge from the area, also show higher levels of place attachment. This is not something new and has been shown in many other research, but here this makes me wonder, what is the role of place attachment in this area of mobility and globalization? Which other aspects can enhance this attachment? Can place attachment be developed through tourism, through information, through knowing the values of some products that we consume from distant landscapes? Another interesting aspect was to see how respondents with higher levels of education, incomes, and qualification also showed higher levels of awareness and responsibility. This once again highlights the importance of personal capabilities and empowering structures in regard to affordability and education for taking personal responsibility. And finally, to conclude with this part, I just wanted to show how we observed that all the respondents appreciated more often functions connected to local production. Which might make us wonder, is this a matter of generational change, or is it more a matter of maturity? But it for sure requires a further investigation and attention, because it's a key aspect in in the interactions between people and landscapes through food. So with this, I want to finalize this first part, and now I would like to move into the next part of my presentation, which connects to the project I've been contributing to during my first postdoc in Göttingen. And here I would like to present food as a way of connecting people with landscapes. But it has to be food products that originate from a specific distinct landscape that have a specific character and that are linked to the local identity. And we call these food products landscape products. So the hypothesis is that these landscape products provide a linkage between consumers and landscape of production, whether it is at a local level or at a distant level. And examples of these products might be ham from the dehesas of Extremadura, or olive oil from Lesbos, wine from the Alto Douro. So these are just some examples. What I wanted to, or what we investigated in this research was how can these landscape products be characterized in the Mediterranean region? How are they embedded in the landscapes of production in regard to their ecological, cultural, social, and economic outcomes? And also how they connect landscapes to consumers. This has been, what I will present has been recently published in Landscape Ecology, Linking Food Systems and Landscape Sustainability in the Mediterranean region. And as I said, this is part of this broader project called Landscape Chains. So the first thing we did is to develop a framework to look at these landscape products. So we looked at their product qualities, the farming practices, the value chain characteristics. So how is the communication of their qualities being conveyed to consumers? Also, what are the landscape sustainability outcomes of these products in terms of ecology, culture, society, and economy? We based this study on an online expert survey where we approach experts across the Mediterranean on food systems and landscape sustainability sciences. And we asked them to select a product they can associate to a distinct landscape and a product that contributes to these landscapes. And we got a sample of 54 products, mostly tree crops, including wine and olive oil, but also almonds, other fruits. We also had some examples of animal products, of cereals, of vegetables. So what we, if we look at this graph in which I show, so we asked the respondents whether they think that the product contributes to cultural and ecological outcomes in the landscapes of production. And here we can see how most of the respondents strongly agree with that the product preserves the local culture. It's a key ingredient in local recipes, that people in the area identify themselves with it, that it preserves biodiversity, especially in connection to autochthonous species. So we can say that landscape products are very well embedded in the landscapes of production, understanding embeddedness by this integration in the cultural and ecological territorial context of these landscapes. And thereby they contribute to maintain their distinctive character, generating identity, preserving biodiversity and local culture. This is all in part due to the fact that most of the products are grown using low intensity farming practices and involving traditional knowledge and techniques, and also involving multiple small producers, although that was not always the case. We also can say that these landscape products are well embedded in the landscapes in regard to to the economy and the social aspect. So respondents agreed that landscape products employ an important proportion of the local population, and also that they are a main source of income of producers. They are also important for attracting tourists. But we also can see, based on the responses, how this landscape face the typical socioeconomic problems of the Mediterranean agricultural sector. So, for example, connected in relation to a lack of gender balance, or a lack of fair profit distribution along the value chain, lack of empowerment of the producers that do not participate in the operational rules of these value chains. We also see how even when higher prices are paid for those products than for similar products, this didn't necessarily reflect on those farmers being better off than other farmers. And finally, I want to conclude this part with this slide, looking more at how these products are connecting consumers with landscapes. So very often what keeps these landscapes and the products alive is the willingness of consumers to contribute to preserve these landscapes and to pay a bit more for some characteristics and added value in terms of ecology, of culture, sometimes also about fair prices, although that was not so often the case here. So it was interesting to see how most of the landscape products communicate their authenticity to their products, to the consumers in some way. So we asked the respondents whether the qualities of the product were communicated, and most of them said yes, which help us consider this concept of respatialization of food through embeddedness and communication versus these more placeless and mass market products where consumers cannot know how they have been produced or in which landscapes. And we could identify two well-defined types of landscape products based on the locality and the localness and on how this authenticity is communicated. So on the one hand, more local landscape products where most of the production activities happened in the place, in the landscape of a region, and that were sold also in the landscape of a region, so with shorter value chains, and whose authenticity was communicated through personal interaction. Some examples of these products were almonds or cheese. And then we had this other type of products, which were more international products that were sold also to international consumers, where the communication was mostly done through geographical indication labels, like, for example, in the case of wine. So conveying these marketed values of locality to distant consumers. It was interesting to see these two very different types of products and consider all of them still landscape products, especially when we looked at this dichotomy that we often find in the literature between whether it's better to have more local or more global value chains and so on. So this highlights how in the case of landscape products, it is not so much this geographical distance. In fact, we can even talk of some local global hybridity in this case. But what is important is that the product reaches the consumer embedded with information and communication about the landscape. And just to conclude, I wanted to present a slide where there is this figure that I took from a paper by Kai Chan called Levers and Leverage Points for Pathways to Sustainability, where we can see that among the 8 leverage points, there is one that says unleash latent values of responsibility to enable widespread action. I really like the way this is expressed, especially with the words unleash and latent, because I think that these values and this connectedness is somehow intrinsic to all of us. What is not, however, is the enabling structures that can help these values to translate into more sustainable behaviors and a change towards sustainability. And for that, there are several aspects that need to be considered. On the one hand, when we see how important it is to interact or the multiple ways of interacting with the landscape, and at the same time, we see the simplification of agricultural European landscapes everywhere. There is something that needs to be further explored and emphasized. Also, looking at how education, income levels, and qualification is connected to these levels of responsibility. So it's clearly still a lack of empowering structures in that regard in order to allow people to act in consonance with this connectedness to nature. But also in the case of landscape products, and connected to this simplification of landscapes. So very often the labels that are used are more, are very single product oriented. And sometimes this also triggers a simplification of landscapes by prioritizing a single product. For example, in the case of the Douro Valley and the production of wine, which is basically all terraces of wine, plantations, which is very beautiful, but of course then we have to consider this multifunctionality of landscapes. And in that case, we might need to consider whether there might be other labels that are able to capture the qualities of the landscape from a more holistic point of view, also including other products and other types of activities. So with this, I want to conclude the presentation, and thank you very much, all of you, for your attention.
Thank you, Maria, for the nice presentation. I think, well, I see a lot of hands raised, so I guess there will be several questions. For those of you that joined later, I suggest either to physically raise your hand if you have the camera on, or to write your questions in the chat, and then I can read them to Maria to answer each of them. So I don't know if someone with the camera on already has questions. A question? Not yet. I have one. Actually, I have two of them. Since this webinar is intended for young researchers to present their work, but also share their experiences, I think many of the participants would be interested in some of the challenges and joys that you encountered during your research. For example, you mentioned that in the study on values functions valued by people, you used face-to-face questionnaires. While in the other one, you used online tools. Could you say a few words about what are the, from your point of view, of course, advantages of the methods, disadvantages, tips for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Simona. Yeah, that's a good question. I will have to think about the response, but I think both approaches have both positive and negative aspects. So I really like this personal interaction, especially being physically in the landscapes in order to better know what I'm talking about. So these face-to-face interviews, or these interviews that were facilitated on site, are very important, which is something that I was maybe missing a bit in the other project, where it was this survey sent by email, where I could not really relate to the landscapes that the respondents were describing. And this made it also a bit more difficult to better interpret their responses. I think for the face-to-face interviews, of course, you always need more time, which is maybe one of the positive things of the online survey, that once, you just have to send it around and maybe bother with people to answer it. But in terms of time, and especially now with the COVID, I guess that's quite a good way of going to it. But I guess it depends completely on what you are researching. And I personally like place-based research, because I find that the complexity of the topics we are talking about is so big that if you don't have a sense of the landscape you are describing and the dynamics that are going on, I think it's very easy that you misinterpret or miss many important aspects.
Thank you. I might have another question, maybe related to what you mentioned, place-based. In the second part of your presentation, you mentioned that you see labels, particularly labels that cover various functions or products, food products that come from the landscape, would be a way to go, maybe instead of having single product labels. Have you heard of such initiatives, or in your study did you see people being open to such an initiative?
I am aware of some researchers and institutions trying to find ways of somehow collect indicators in order to assess how the landscapes are managed and their sustainability. I don't know if the idea is then to develop a label that can be applied to food products, for instance, but I was thinking more in relation to this FAO program of the globally important agricultural systems, or the high nature value landscapes, or the Satoyama landscapes, and whether this could be translated to somehow to a label that it's connected to these products, because those are all programs that have this holistic view of the landscapes, and I think that's something quite interesting. So if they could be a bit more widespread, and people would start to relate to these programs, maybe could be an option.
We also have a question in the chat from Merham. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name. Do you have tips and tricks for how to link qualitative data to different values of nature or landscape in terms of methods, techniques? This relates mainly to the first part of your presentation. So tips and tricks on how to link that.
Okay, so in the papers that I have led, I have mostly worked with qualitative data that was very structured. So it was not descriptions that people provided, but more just structured surveys or questionnaire where they just have to select what type of values they perceive and so on. So maybe that's not so helpful, but in other papers where I have been a co-author, we have used many of these this open descriptions and analyze them through content analysis techniques or coding, trying to find, I don't know how much in depth shall I go in the answer, but yeah, you can go to it in a more inductive or deductive way. So if you already have a framework in mind, then you can see how the different answers match or not in this with the different items of this framework, or you can just try to see which are the recurrent aspects that come in these descriptions, and then try to find where it fits.
Since you mentioned frameworks and way of approaching things, in the second part of your presentation, you also showed us that the framework on food systems and landscape products. Could you say a few words about how you developed it? Maybe suggestion for literature if you have something in mind. Sometimes it's difficult to name a paper, but a bit how that turned out the way it is in the paper.
Yes, so here it was a bit challenging for me because it was completely a new field, this of sustainable food systems. But luckily, we were working with a colleague from the Faculty of Agriculture in Göttingen, in Kassel, who is very experienced here. So he was able to point us to the main references in terms of sustainable food systems, and there we can just combine this with our expertise on landscape ecology to derive the different aspects that we thought it was interesting to cover in the case of landscape products. So I guess my recommendation will be, if it is a complete new field for you, to get in touch with other experts and exchange on that.
Thank you. We also have two questions. First one is from Sylvia. Considering the different landscape or agricultural products, are there differences? How far the products support landscape connectedness and stewardship?
Yes, so if I can specify, so is there a cheese community that is more connected to landscape than the cereals community, or doesn't it matter what product it is?
Yeah, I think, I think I could not answer that question based on the data we have, but that's not something that we could identify. So when we did the cluster analysis, we did observe that some type of products were more usually under these certification labels and others more under this personal interaction. But I wouldn't dare to say what is connecting more people to the landscapes. But this also, I found, it's quite obvious, but sometimes you have to see it in your results in order to somehow put it in words. But the fact that cereal products or vegetables were never under certification labels of origin. That's why I thought, oh, that's really, those labels are not capturing these multiple aspects of.
Also, Anna has a question. Maybe Anna, you want to ask it yourself?
Okay, you mentioned the simplification of agricultural landscapes in Europe, and I know it wasn't the focus of your research, but how does this ongoing process affect your research and your findings?
Yes, so here I was more building on the results from Peter Verburg and other people from the project I've been involved in, and it's looking at the literature, but this is something that I would like to explore further in my research. So I haven't had the chance now to look at that. but it's definitely a topic that requires more investigation. Also, when we think of products, for example, almonds, which at least in Spain you associate with, yeah, also very distinctive landscapes, usually extensive. And now with all this trend of consuming milks that are not animal-based, almonds are becoming a very important plantation, and the intensification of landscapes in the south of Spain in relation to almond production is being quite extreme, and also the simplification. So I think it would be very interesting to compare a bit the different connectedness that people feel to those landscapes in the cases where the production is kept still more traditional, and in the cases where it is being intensified. Mm-hmm. So again, I cannot answer, but very interesting topic.
Thank you.
We also have another question in the chat from Merham. I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself, or should I read it? And then we have another question from Werner. Okay, I will read the question. It relates to the first part of your presentation. You mentioned two justifications for the interest of the elderly people in active engagement with greening. So the question is, do you think that the lack of time would be an aspect for the lack of participation by younger participants, or too much stress from the daily responsibilities? What would be your opinion on that?
Yeah, thank you. So it was the question, the way we asked it to the respondent was not so much in how actively they participate in growing these products, but it was more how whether they appreciate the landscapes for the food products that they, yeah, that are grown there. And in that regard, I think that if it is a matter of younger or older generations, a cause might be that now we have, at least in Spain, that has changed a lot and very quickly in the last decades. So before, we didn't have all these supermarkets in absolutely every single corner of Spain, no matter how rural it is, that has kakis and avocados and mangoes and products that are completely from a different, not only season, but region of the world. So I think younger generation might even not be aware of what type of products are grown in their landscapes, and also in relation to harvesting possibilities. I think that's something that unless you have a specific contact with, I don't know, your elder, sorry, that's German, your grandparents, that they have been doing that and they have the tradition of harvesting, I don't see how the young generation will, yeah, have access to this type of knowledge.
Thank you, Maria. We have the question from Werner. Do you want to ask it yourself?
Yeah, I can do this. I've seen on your slides on the analysis outcomes that the cultural outcomes or the appreciation of the cultural outcomes were larger or higher than from the ecological outcomes. So the appreciation regarding the preservation of local culture or local recipes were much higher appreciated than, for instance, the maintenance of soils or preservation of water resources, which I don't know where, maybe it's too abstract, or the connections are stronger because you know local recipes from your grandparents or whatever, or you know some farmers that still maintain some orchards or have a farming practice. And we also see this also on successful campaigns like Terra Madre from Slow Food. So the cultural strings of the connectivity seem to be higher than the ecological, and I'm wondering what maybe we can conclude out of this. Do we need more effort on how to strengthen the ecological strength, or should we strengthen the cultural strengths to have then the side effects, the ecological side effects supported that go along, because the appreciation of cultural effects are much higher? Or what would you conclude out of this?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So on the one hand, I think it's very connected to what you just said. I think for people, even for the experts that maybe took part in the survey, it's sometimes easier to be aware of these cultural outcomes than the ecological outcomes. We have seen that also when people are asked to mention regulating ecosystem services, for instance, that usually people don't perceive them so much, just because they don't understand that. And in the case of the landscape products, I think that one of the reasons is that they might not necessarily be contributing to maintaining soils, to preserving water resources and so on, because we have also been reported by the experts how the practices are being intensified with the time also. So it might be that these products still keep these very important cultural outcomes, but the ecological outcomes, this is something that might not be so positive still. Also, even in the case of products under certification, very often what is certified is not necessarily the low intensity of the farming practices, which in the end are very important in these ecological outcomes.
We also have a question from Nika regarding to one of the maps included in your presentation, the one where you showed the geographical distribution of the landscape products. So the question is, how did you select them?
Yes, that's also an important question, directly to one of the biases of the research. So we didn't select the products. We sent the survey to absolutely all the experts we could find across the Mediterranean. So first we looked in Google for the main universities in the main cities in the different Mediterranean countries, and we sent it to the researchers in the faculties that we thought could have the expertise to answer the survey. And here might be already the first bias. So I don't know if you realize how we had many products from Spain. And this is also based on the fact that 3 of the co-authors come from Spain. So our networks there are a bit stronger. So it's just how many people did we manage to engage in answering the survey.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we can conclude. Oh, Verle has a question.
No, I don't have a question. I want to say something at the end. So that's why I was raising my hand.
Okay, yes. I wanted to say we can conclude with the question and answers part. So please, Verle, if you want to say.
Yeah, I was just reflecting while Maria was talking that as I said in the beginning, I think it's very nice that you also give now the overview of what you have been doing the last years as an example of a young researcher and how much work and publications that you made. And maybe we can exchange also with Simona the idea to put some of the key references that you mentioned in the presentation. We can add them on the website of IALE-Europe, so people can find the references you use in the presentation yourself. Yeah. And the last question is maybe an open question for everyone, because we are planning to have we are planning to have similar sessions in the future, so in the next months. We received already some proposals from other colleagues, but if people that participated now today are saying, well, I would like to volunteer for a next session to present my work and to have the kind of discussions like we had today, I would say send us an email to Simona, and then we keep in contact with you, because I think this might be also a way to kind of a snowball effect, that you know people now and that you see how it's working, to make people kind of enthusiastic to participate in the future. I also saw that, Isabel, you raised your hands.
Yes, it was meant to be a little bit before you talking the last sentence, so sorry for that. But what I would like to comment is how it's a reflection on Maria and her work, and I think it is really interesting to see how to deal with landscape and to deal with the different kinds of aspects and bringing them together and getting a broader perspective and understanding. You don't know anymore what expertise you are. And I thought that beginning remark of yours was very interesting. I think many of us might feel that way along the years, but I think that eventually young researchers are more were pressed or more enthusiastic about getting this multiple disciplines all together in their own knowledge in order to fit in. I don't know if you could somehow comment on that expertise and how this, how having different kinds of expertise in yourself helps you also better to connect to others and to connect to other kinds of knowledge. And I don't know if someone that is here and is doing their research and feels the same way wants to contribute as well. And thank you. Well done, Maria.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if the question was first to me and then to the others, but I will also say that I think this a bit of dispersion is sometimes a bit overwhelming, especially because at some point you really need to define an expertise. And right now I have 3 different project proposals I'm trying to get funding for with very different topics, because I'm not very sure which direction to take. But I also think that it indeed gives you some skills to allow you to maybe connect more with other fields or other expertises, which I think it's very important in our in our field of research. So I would be very interested to know how the other people feel about this.
Maybe I can add something here. During the questions, you mentioned at some point that for one of your studies, you also collaborated with people. So maybe, I mean, this diverse background also helps young researchers to engage easier in collaborations, because they are already open to different, let's say, theoretical aspects or different methods. At least this is how my experience is. I see that I guess we are finished with the questions. I don't see anyone wanting to ask further ones. I think we can thank Maria again for her presentation. And as Isabel said, we could really see there's a lot of work from your side, and are looking forward to read the papers now. Congratulations to what you presented and for your work, and good luck with the 3 project applications you mentioned. And thank you all the participants for being here with us today, for asking these interesting questions, and we are looking forward to the next webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Simona, also to get it organized. So we hope to see you back soon.